Great. So it's my real privilege to be here today with Sally Spinks from IDEO. I must admit, in fact, I can do my same introduction that I'm going to do to you in our session shortly, but I've got to admit to having a big organisational crush on IDEO, having been a lifelong designer, seeing an organisation such as yours that takes a really sound design methodology and then really runs with it and applies it in all kinds of different places and different ways to solve real problems that real humans have, I find very inspirational. And Sally, you have a very interesting role there. So can you tell us a little about that, please?
Yeah, I'm a design director at IDEO, and my background is in organizational design, so that's what I focus on. And although we started out as a product design company 35 years ago, we've realized that the process of design thinking has led us into using that for loads of other purposes. So we moved a lot into service design. And of course, with service design, actually, it's about transforming the organization to deliver that service. So when we work with a client, so for example, we work a lot in hospitality and in retail. Actually, when we design the new service that's customer facing, we also then have to design how does the organization reorganize itself and how do we skill up people to deliver that new service. And that's the role that I principally play, is helping people, helping our clients actually get the services to market.
I mean, it sounds that perhaps, I mean, do you bring about kind of cultural change within the organisations that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, that's the other arm of what we do. So not only designing services, but actually it is about cultural transformation for organisations. Lots of companies come to us to say, we want to be more innovative, we want to be more creative. Everybody's sort of on that bandwagon. And we help those organizations figure out why. What is it you're innovating towards? And then how do we create a culture? How do we create the capabilities? How do we create the conditions, really, for companies to be creatively competitive? And I think that's really important today, because everybody's trying to move their organizations forward. You know, people have gone into commoditization. So it's really, how do you find that edge and be very agile and very nimble in how you work? So that's what we help organizations to do.
Yeah, very good. And of course, that agility is often something which goes out the door when organizations get to scale and they get structures in place. And being able to maintain that is critical to survival. So, I mean, before we get, I can talk about that in it for sure, we'll get back to it in a bit, but it would be great if you could talk the audience through design thinking. I mean, what is it? Can you just talk us through the stages, please?
Yeah, I think design thinking, it sounds simple, but actually it's quite a complex process if you go through it in a really detailed way. But let me explain very briefly. It starts off with a period of inspiration. And when we say inspiration, it's about going out and doing research, but it's not the classic kind of research that perhaps a research or marketing agency would do. So we don't do focus groups. We don't ask people what they want. We see a small number, but we go very deep in terms of understanding the human needs, what is going on for that individual. So, for example, we might go and spend a day or half a day in someone's home when we're looking to design some new financial services. And we understand exactly what they do in their lives. We understand exactly how they manage their money. We start to really investigate their life as opposed to asking them what they'd like from a financial service. And then we bring back that inspiration, and then we'll look at analogous industries. So the condition we're trying to design for, we think of something very similar. So a good example for that is we were working with an emergency room in a hospital, and we thought, well, what's very similar to those conditions? You know, something comes in very quick, you have to do something really quickly and move them on. So we took the team that were working on that particular project, redesigning the experience in the emergency room, we took them to NASCAR race pits, you know, where cars are coming in, people do stuff really quickly and then it's out. And that's really about just getting inspiration. It's not so we're going to copy things that you find there, but it's getting inspiration for design ideas that might help you unlock some future concepts. So we bring all of this inspiration back into the room. And I think this is where we find a lot of organizations, you know, they might have done their research and found out what they want to do. They move straight to implementation.
Okay.
Actually, what we do is move into our next phase, which is called insight and spotting opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So we spend quite a lot of time just posting up all the pictures we've collected, all of the research, and trying to spot patterns and opportunities across those pieces of research, so that we can see something that's really interesting that might be a gap in people's expectations that we can design for.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask people what they want, they're not very good at articulating it. This is a way of spotting those gaps. So a good example to illustrate that is working with a finance company. They wanted to encourage more people to open savings accounts, and going into people's homes, we noticed that everybody had a change jar in their house. And in this particular circumstance, it wasn't in the UK, it was in another country. They were rounding up their utility bills as well. And if you asked them if they were able to save, they all said, no, I can't save, I don't have any spare cash. But actually, when you saw those patterns across all of the individuals, you could see that they were saving in micro amounts. So we took that as an opportunity to then design a debit card that did exactly the same. So if you bought a coffee in Starbucks for $2.95, it rounded it up to $3 and siphoned it off into into an account. So it's about leveraging existing behaviors, but because people can't articulate that, you do this very kind of deep research, but you're sort of in this insights phase for quite a long time, and the answer's not very clear. And I think what we find, that's when people get very nervous. You have to live with ambiguity in a design process. And then from that insights phase, you move into ideation, which is sort of classic brainstorming, which is where a lot of people start, but we're sort of already halfway through a project by the time we get to brainstorming. And then moving on from there, concepting and implementation is about prototyping. So once we have an idea, we make things tangible really, really quickly. So you and I could talk about an idea for a chair. I've probably got something very different in my head to what you have if you're just describing it. Even if you sketch it or start to make it with some cardboard, it brings it to life, and we can both sit there and say, no, but what if it was a bit like this or a bit like that? So we bring things to life very quickly, very cheaply as well, so that we can iterate and take it out to users and iterate it and move it forward through probably various incarnations before you get to your finished product or service, because equally it doesn't have to be a thing, but we also prototype human interactions as well and services.
Very good.
So that, in a nutshell, and it's quite a long and complex process, but that in a nutshell is design thinking.
Yeah, and the thing which I find really interesting is if people from learning and development, so in this industry, maybe sitting there thinking, well, I can understand how you might design a chair that way. I can understand how you could design a service as you've just described. But actually, how relevant is that to me? But actually, I know from software design, it's the Eric Rice book, The Lean Startup, which is it's basically design thinking. And that inspiration for that came from Toyota's way of designing and manufacturing cars, and this idea of rapid prototyping and small batches and so forth. It all aligns. However, in my experience, a lot of our the big corporates out there, they like to start with a solution. That is really great that you said that the period of ambiguity people are uncomfortable with. That is absolutely the case. In fast-moving corporates, what do you mean you don't know? What do you mean you haven't got the answer yet? I just told you what the problem was. Haven't you got the answer? I mean, how do you manage that with people?
Yeah, I mean, it can be very tricky, and clients who work with us get very nervous at certain points. But we always try and say up front, it is going to be a roller coaster of a journey. But we've used the process so many times, you do get something unique out of the end of it that is actually applicable to a human need. So sometimes people start with a technology and try and force it. We try and start with a need and design a technology to suit that. So I think in those terms, what we also find is if we can peg what we're trying to develop as a concept it's rooted in human need. It's so much easier to have the argument with the person who doesn't agree with what you're doing. So you and I could come for a leadership development program that our boss doesn't agree with, and then it's their word against ours. Actually, because ours is rooted in the need of the person you're designing for, it's much easier if you tell some human stories about how this thing is going to work, how it's actually satisfying the genuine needs of the community that you're designing for. It takes away the ambiguity of you know, your word against mine.
You've got the data, you've got the evidence.
And I think that building the solution very quickly, but very, very cheaply, and doing it with a small group and iterating it is all that you can fend off that. What do you mean you haven't got the answer yet? Because actually, we're not going to develop a big learning management system or a big, you know, online module. Actually, the way we do it is we sketch some pieces of paper out with what might be on a screen and put it in front of people. And what we find is if the prototype is really rough, people are much better at going, yeah, actually, I'd put that over there. And no, I don't think this works at all. And, you know, how about if you did this?
That's very interesting.
Because, yeah, when it's polished, people are they don't necessarily want to upset the apple cart because they think, oh, you've already spent a lot of money on this. Whereas if it's a piece of paper, then they're more eager to work with you. And it's that co-creation, I guess, that really works for us. And then you might move to the next stage. So if it is a piece of learning technology, again, we wouldn't build anything. We'd either use something that's already out there. So can you do it through Facebook or some existing technology? Or we build it very simply in an app like Flinto that, you know, looks like and works like, but still, you know, we might fake a back end for the purpose of iteration. So to us, prototyping is mitigating risk. So if in answer to those people who say you don't know the answer yet, it's like, would you rather spend £500,000 building this thing and then find it doesn't work? Or would you, you know, allow us to work out the answer through this process of iteration, and then we'll build the thing that really does work for people.
I mean, I guess something that counts in your favor with IDEO, that you're known for this. You know, you're known for design thinking, you're known for your really robust methodology and the approach that you take, very, very talented people. How about someone who works within an L&D team that says, I think we should start using these design thinking ideas? I mean, how do they win those people over?
It's a tough one because, you know, we have the same issue when clients come to us looking for work. We have to win them over in the same way because a lot of them are quite nervous about, you know, we can never say at the end of 12 weeks working with us, you'll have X, because we don't know.
See, that is a really tricky proposition, isn't it?
Tricky,
you know?
Completely tricky proposition. And I totally feel for those people sitting in, you know, L&D departments who want to make use of this kind of thinking. They're in exactly the same position. And I think my advice to that would be is start with something really small. So try something using the principles of design thinking to show that this methodology has some impact. So is there something in, you know, whatever shape or form it might be, that's not the £1 million program or the big bet thing, that you could actually spend time in people's workplace, really understanding what their pain points are and spotting those opportunities rather than asking them what they want. And then just take something rough back to them and iterate it with them. So you've got a bit of a case study to say, look, this is how it works. Let us try something bigger. But it's no different to how, you know, IDEO.
The same challenges.
We have the same challenges. You know, some people, you know, find it really hard to understand that they'll have something out the back end of the process.
And I mean, so much of it depends on your observation of people. I mean, how much do you need to know about psychology, human behavior, human traits, these kind of things? Or is it, I mean, do you need a kind of good grounding in that to get the most from the process? Or is it really just that being able to objectively observe a situation?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I don't think you need a background in that. So as IDEO teams go out and do their research, we usually have someone who is a design researcher on the team, but all of our designers have the sensibility to, and it's about listening and asking the right questions as much as it is about, asking people what they want. So we never generally ask people what they want to see. It's just seeing what you're designing for in the broader context. So really understanding a day in the life of. So if I give you an example, in a previous job where I was head of learning design in an organization, we went and asked a group of people what they wanted in terms of some learning technology. And everybody universally said, yeah, we want this. It would be awesome. Go build it. We went and built it. What happened? Nobody used it.
Yeah.
Right? If we'd have actually sat in their office for a day watching what they do and how frenetic their lives were and how busy they were, we'd have actually realized that they had no time to upload this information to this, this system that they wanted. So that's why nobody used it. But we didn't spend that time in context. We only asked them what they wanted. So I don't think you need a background in psychology. You just need to be very good at listening and watching, and observing is a great skill, right? Not putting words into people's mouths, actually just seeing how people interact with each other, noting things down, taking photographs of the environment, bringing all of this back and posting it up around a wall. I mean, our project rooms look, completely chaotic. They're covered with Post-its and pictures and everything. And then starting to spot patterns. What are we seeing as some of the pain points, but maybe also what are some of the opportunity spaces that we could actually move into to design?
I mean, as a designer, I mean, I find it very challenging not to immediately jump to a solution. As somebody describes a problem to me, my brain is already pattern matching and looking for ways that can be solved, generally with stuff they've already got. Whereas such a key part of the process is not allowing that to happen, or at least being able to kind of park that. I mean, it seems like I would think that's a natural tendency of a designer. We're problem solvers. So how do you stop yourself from making that jump?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a natural tendency for designers. I think it's a natural tendency for most people, and particularly when you're in a learning and development role, people are looking for answers, people are looking for solutions. The world moves really fast, isn't it? So there's kind of pressure there as well as your own brain kind of already trying to work out. We do it all the time. We listen to the first half of a sentence and we try and work out, what the solution is. And I think, when I described the process of design thinking earlier, where we gather all this inspiration, actually being able to stand back and objectively look at it will give you a better quality. So we know it gives you a better quality of outcome in the end. And actually trying 2 or 3 different approaches. So we often, once we've spotted what we think we want to design, we'll try probably several different approaches. And start to take those back out. And then we'll see which ones are the weak ones that fall by the wayside as users start to comment on them and grow it. But it's almost like if you go through the process a few times, you start to realize the power of living in that abstract world for a little bit longer before you go to a solution, because the solution will be so much better than jumping to those conclusions. But yeah, I mean, we all do it. It's natural. So it will happen, but actually if you included that solution you've come up with alongside some other things you spent some time working out, you'd probably see that sometimes your one might fall off. Which is always interesting.
I mean, as you were speaking there, it reminded me of some of John Cleese's writing and thinking about creativity. I'm a lifelong Monty Python fan. I love anarchic abstract weird comedy and so forth. And I remember I read an article that he wrote, and he said that creativity isn't a talent, it's a process. And he viewed some of the other Pythons as far better comedians and better writers than him, but he would consistently manage to write the more successful sketches. And the process that he described, which I won't go through in detail, but part of it is to kind of immerse yourself in the problem or the thing you're trying to do. So this is the kind of research phase. But you then, as he described it beautifully, you let your mind just gently rest against it, and you don't force it, and you allow yourself to be in that state for as long as you're able to, and you generate more ideas. And he would allow himself much more time than some of the other Pythons who would come up with, it's a sketch on such, they come up with, that's it, it's done, you know. But he would spend more time there. So I guess it's dealing with that ambiguity.
It's brilliant. I love that as a fact. I'm going to use that in future of, like, you know, design thinking and comedy go well together, right? No, you're absolutely right. It is delaying that moment where you settle on something, keeping some options open, but taking those out and testing them in the, you know, we call it just basically that MVP, minimum viable proposition. What can you do in the cheapest possible way to test this thing out so that you can iterate up to a point of expenditure, rather than producing a solution today that may have cost you lots of money that doesn't quite nail it. So it's mitigating risk. And maybe that's what he did with his comedy. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I do a lot of reading on the creative process. I'm really fascinated by it. It's one of the reasons I like IDEO so much. It's the same thing with the artists that I really appreciate. There are people who are creatives and they create in all kinds of different forms. So David Byrne, lead singer of Talking Heads, not only a very talented musician and writer and singer, but he writes for the screen. He's designed buildings, he's designed cycleways, he paints, he's a digital artist. I think the same thing is true with IDEO and your design methodologies. We're designers, you know, give us a problem to fix. Doesn't really matter where it is, you know, or what it is.
No, I mean, you know, we solve problems from, you know, completely, you know, complex medical equipment to your experience of walking into a hotel, which might be the place itself, but certainly the service you're going to receive. You know, there's a whole spectrum of things that you can apply design thinking to. And I think, you know, I come from a background of learning design myself and, you know, some generalist HR and way back industrial relations. And if I'd have known about design thinking when I was in that world, well, you know, my life would have been a lot different, I think, in that I just think you can take those principles and apply them in any situation. And everything is designed. You know, this microphone's designed. Well, you know, everything in the world is designed, and every interaction can be designed as well. I think that's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to be a thing. It can be an interaction as well. Whether that's a technological interaction or a human to human.
So I've been learning on the creative leadership course, designing rituals, you know. I love that. I mean, not to put you too much on the spot, but I think a few examples of where you've gone through a design thinking process, which might be within your own area of kind of service and organization design, maybe other work the organization's done, but where the solution that has been reached is quite surprising and a lot more efficient than what the customer or the audience might have initially thought the solution would be.
Okay, I think I'll talk about an example of we were designing a new healthcare service from scratch in another country other than the UK. And one of the things that we feel quite passionately about when we're working inside organizations is how we mirror the customer experience we're trying to create inside the organization.
Okay.
So, for example, in this particular case, from the research we'd done with, you know, potential patients, one of the design principles we came up with to serve the patient was about leveling the playing field. So that in all of the interactions between doctor and patient, so whether that's physically we're on the same level, the language that we use, the way the doctor might be dressed, the sharing of information, it was all the design was about being on the same level. Leveling the playing field was the principle. So we then took that and we turned that inside on the organization and said, if we designed the organization and it was about leveling the playing field, what would that look like? So it's really about how do we minimize hierarchy, right? And we all know that doctors classically, there's a huge
There's
amount of
there's a
huge amount of
isn't there?
hierarchy.
Yeah.
So we did things like the way we express the organization chart was that we actually took the patient journey. So from, booking an appointment and turning up and seeing the doctor and the nurse and everything else. And we placed the people against the parts of the patient journey. So it wasn't expressed as a hierarchy. It was expressed as how each person would serve the patient. For a learning example, in that case, kind of leveling the playing field, we developed what we called empathy exercises.
Very good, yeah.
To teach the doctors about the service, the kind of service we wanted to give to the patients. And basically we piloted this, we prototyped it. We took a few doctors and we gave them a laptop and said, okay, your laptop's broken, you've got an hour before a really important presentation, take it to an IT dude. And it was one of our IT dudes, and he basically played a role which was ask really complex technical questions, do a bit of stuff on the thing, slam it down, and then go, here you are, it's done.
Yeah.
And the doctors initially were like, well, I don't know what that was all about. And then the penny drops, right? Okay, this is potentially how I sometimes deal with my patients.
It's one of those analogous situations, isn't it?
Completely. And it's really powerful. You don't have to teach someone how to do it, because at the end of that process, they all went, okay. So we said, okay, if you had to come up with some principles of the patient experience you want to create, what would it be? And surprisingly, the 5 things they came up with were pretty close to the list we'd already done. But they got there through quite an interesting process, rather than us sitting in a classroom and going, the 5 principles for customer service are these. What, how would that be?
That's very interesting. I tried a similar thing in a design workshop that I was running. I wanted to, at the start, because I have kind of design principles that I kind of not adhere to slavishly, but they serve me very well. And I wanted to establish within the group, and they were very skilled, very talented designers, what are the design principles that we're going to use to design this thing? And they really struggled to come up with them. And I was sort of, come on, this is the stuff that probably it's so ingrained in the way you've been working for years that you find it really difficult to think about it. But looking back now, based on what you said, I think if we'd done some kind of empathy exercise or something that got them to kind of experience that user side of things, I think those principles would have come a lot more easily to them.
Yeah, it is really interesting that, we find empathy exercises in any learning and development are just so powerful. So, people who are going to work in an old people's home, having their hands and feet bound together and being force-fed, having their, being force-fed with food until it dribbles out of their mouth, and suddenly being able to appreciate what it feels like on the other side is a great way of starting off training with people. They understand what it's like to be in those conditions. So I think it can be really powerful.
I think for me, empathy it's the number one. It's not a skill, but it's the number one ability for any designer, bar any. As far as I'm concerned, if you can't empathise with the people that you're designing for, how are you ever going to design a solution? But at the same time, there's also that think like a newbie thing. Being able to look at something with a fresh set of eyes. And this is an area within kind of L&D that we sometimes come up against as professionals, that, who are you to be coming up with the best way to teach this topic when you don't know anything about this topic and I'm the subject matter expert. But actually what I would always, talk to them about and argue the point that we're approaching this subject with the eyes of a new learner, and the stuff that confuses us and we don't get, or the stuff that's really straightforward and we do get, we're going to be much more like your learners than you, the subject matter expert, will be. And that empathy is, I think it's to think like a newbie thing is to be jealously guarded. I also love this idea of outsider thinking. So that feeds into your stuff about analogous situations you can take things from, where quite often the solutions come not from the expert who's been focused on that problem for 20 years. It's from somebody who says, oh yeah, we do something like that over here and we found this solution worked for it. and suddenly that solution works here as well.
Yeah, and I think there are two things about what you've just said. One is the first thing about the, being an expert or not being an expert and having the newbie eyes. One of the ways we always work inside IDEO is we always have a multidisciplinary team working on every project. So, and that team works the whole way through the project. So even though the design researcher might be leading at the first part of it, and then the actual designers coming in and leading at that part, everybody has a unique take on that problem. And so I would suggest in learning design, you should absolutely have a multidisciplinary team, which can be, from the L&D team itself, from the subject matter experts to the people who you're creating for, to other people around the organization. Everybody will have a view about it, and actually that's what makes it stronger, as opposed to just being, the subject expert. I think that's one thing. And then I think the empathy thing is just, it sort of becomes ingrained with you. If you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes to experience something, then you're going to make a way better designer than, seeing it from the outside. Actually physically experience the thing you're going to train for is really interesting.
Well, thank you, Sally. Time is up, I'm afraid.
No
we have our
problem.
next session to prepare for shortly. So, yeah, thank you so much for doing this Google Hangout with me.
Having an enjoyable chat. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.